host this afternoon. Just a quick introduction about Talk Active. It is a chat show where we discuss issues. We invite leading voices. We invite people who are leading in their own environments and in their own spaces. We invite them to talk about issues that impact on leadership and business brands. So this afternoon, I am really pleased to have our panelists, and I'm going to introduce them shortly. As I said, my name is Toluwani Akahome, and I am a leadership and people development consultant. I work with Vantage Dimensions as a lead consultant. And so I am really pleased to have Owade Yusuf and Joseph Maniragana in the room this afternoon in the webinar. Joseph, I hope I pronounced that name right.
Very correct.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, because I've been practicing it. So you're welcome this afternoon to Talk Active. Just a quick introduction. Owade is a talent acquisition and human resources professional. Owade is well experienced. She has worked in the oil and gas industry, in the fast moving consumer good industry, across Dubai, across Malaysia and Nigeria. And Owade, your ultimate goal is to be the voice for the underrepresented and to create awareness on equality in the society. And that makes you one of the leading voices to talk about this highly topical issue today. Joseph, you are originally from Rwanda, but you now live in South Africa. And you are right now the Partnership and Liaison Officer at Africa Monitor, a Pan-African organization founded by the Archbishop Njongo Ndugane, to monitor development resource commitments, delivery and impact on the grassroots, and to build strong additional African voices to the development agenda. So Joseph, you have worked and you're still working a lot with different communities, especially young people. And today we're going to be talking about issues that relate to those who are marginalized amongst us in Africa. So we're talking about maximizing Africa's potentials, and we're looking at it from the diversity and inclusion perspective. And as you both are people that lead people from the point of view of organizations and from the point of view of communities. And so it is important that you lend your voice to this topic about diversity and inclusion. As you know, that diversity and inclusion is one of the strategies by which organizations build their people and they achieve business objectives. But even beyond organizations today, Joseph is going to be talking about how we can use the strategy of D&I to maximize the potential of our people on the continent. So here in Europe, I'm here at the moment in Europe, and D&I is one of those really important objectives, strategic objectives that businesses are looking at more and more. In other words, we're looking at how can we get more people that are in those marginalized spaces. For example, women, for example, people with disabilities, people from different ethnic backgrounds, different types of people. How can we get them more into the workplaces? How can we get their voices more to be heard? How can we ensure that their capabilities and their potentials are optimized, are maximized? And that's what the conversation will be about today. But today, we are talking about it from the point of view of Africa. How can we get this conversation going regarding the African continent? And so I'm really pleased to be talking to you today. So welcome, Owade. And welcome, Joseph. Please unmute your mics.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Thank you.
Excellent. So let me start with you, Owade. I know that you're based in Nigeria, but you've also worked in Malaysia. You've worked in Dubai. And I know that you have links in different parts of Africa. Now, diversity and inclusion as a business strategy, as a strategy for leading people, for managing people, and for maximizing their potentials. How is it playing out at the moment in organizations in Africa, particularly where you're based in Nigeria? And I want you to do a bit of comparison. You know? Thank you.
All right. So thank you once again for having me. I want to be sure that I got your question right. How is diversity and inclusion as a business strategy playing out across organizations in Africa?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. So let me start with a little story about myself. I remember in 2011 when I went for my master's, and I was looking at this organization, which was about a street from my university campus, very bright lights, at night. And I told myself I want to work here. That company is Schlumberger. I eventually got an interview, and I was able to, work in that company. But I found out that that was the first day after the first day I resumed. I found out that, okay, what got me in, I would really have to now work on how to stay in. And why is that? Um, all of a sudden, I was very conscious of my accent, um, my skin color, and I realized that I think I would have to, fit in at this point in time. But there was something my manager did that today, when I look back at it, that I'm trying to lay a point for when you say diversity. Diversity sometimes is not just enough, not sometimes, most of the time, it comes hand in hand with inclusion. Yes, we come with diversity. We want diverse perspectives. We want to be more profitable, one global language in local, interpreted locally. This is why we bring people on board. But then you now need to make people feel included. So for the first 2 months, while I was, when I joined, I was not having my weekly reviews in our office. It usually happened with, through a coffee chat. Hello, are they come? Let's go for coffee. And then while we're at the coffee table, we have a chat on my performance. How are things going? Let me know if you need anything. And this we did for 2 months. It's intentional. When you want to drive diversity and inclusion, is highly intentional. Bringing it back to Africa, I would say that we've started the conversation, which is why myself and you are sitting down here today to talk about diversity and inclusion. However, we still have a long way to go using diversity and inclusion as a strategic, as a leadership strategic objective to make organizations scale up. Then we would really have to drive on that one. And then I will talk on, pinpoint it on ethnic diversity. So ethnic diversity and gender diversity. You would find here that, I was reading a study where it said about 60% of the CEOs the CEOs in Nigeria are actually female. If you bring it to the corporate world, you would find a whole lot of women. But as you start to go up, the numbers start to thin out. Only about 5% of women through the course of their careers make it up to CEO or executive level positions in Nigeria. And that is worrisome. Now, let's talk on the inclusion part of it. Currently, people, allow me to use the word disabled people, which is the United Nations way of recognizing people with disabilities, disabled people as well. How are the workplaces being set up to bring on board disabled people? So when I see a staircase and you're talking on diversity and inclusion, I want to see that you have made a pathway that allows a wheelchair pass. Then I know that, yes, there's actually plans to include people with, disabilities. But then we also now need to look at our cultures. I see companies now looking in that direction. I would like to call one name, which is Funke Amobi, who is the head of human capital for Stanbic IBTC. That for me is good. And Ibukun Awoshika, who is the chairman of board for First Bank of Nigeria. But then when you look into companies, or when we want to start and when we want to have the conversations, then we start to miss these women in these conversations.
Thank Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Let me just take this time, and thanks for sharing your thoughts. I'm still going to ask you to come in there with the question I have for you. But I want to take this time to just acknowledge our participants who came in just after I started speaking. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you do have any questions, please put them in the question and answer chat as we go along, and we shall take them. We'll read them at some stage during the webinar. Thank you very much again for sharing that, Owade.
You're welcome.
The question is for you, before I go to Joseph, because Joseph is going to talk about how it plays out on the community arena. Still on organizations, when you look at D&I, because indeed there is the diversity part. So you might have diversity in organizations. And as you said, more and more there are women being brought into the picture, into leadership role, given some seats at the table. But of course, as you said, inclusion is a different part entirely. Someone described it this way: diversity is like asking me to a party. Inclusion is actually inviting me to get up and get up and dance.
Yeah.
So when you talk about that, the inclusion part of it, now when we look at the West, you see that more and more they're getting many women, many people of who are physically challenged, getting them in the picture. The conversation is rife. It's really going on. Now, you mentioned the cultural, the social cultural background of Africa. Is the strategies that are being adopted by Africa, by African organizations, are they strategies that are homegrown, that puts into consideration the social cultural background of the people, or are they strategies that are imported from the West, seeing as the D&I is a big issue in the West as well, but it's really, really coming up, but Africa is still lagging behind. How do you approach it? Is it homegrown? Does it consider the social economic background, the social cultural background, or is it adopted? And if it's adopted, how is it playing out?
Okay, I would say that oftentimes it's adopted. Oftentimes it's adopted rather than being homegrown. And in our own cultural context, when you start to unpack diversity and inclusion, then we now start to localize it so that it fits for purpose within our culture. It's surprising that this is 2020 and it's very okay for somebody to say it boldly that so person cannot work in this role because of this limitation. Because probably the culture allows you to recognize it that way. So oftentimes what I ask is that, yes, we've brought in a whole lot of people. We've brought in, quite a large number of people, but what do we want to do with that diverse workforce? What do we want to do with them? And that is when we begin to adopt our homegrown policies around it.
Give us examples of those. Give us examples of those kind of homegrown policies, please.
Okay, so I'm not sure of any government-sponsored policy, but I do know that for some certain sectors, when I worked in the oil and gas sector, the oil and gas sector had some policies that allowed ethnic diversity.
Okay.
So some certain ethnicities that tend to be on the minority spectrum, you are allowed, you should be able to consider them for job applications, bring them on board, so that way, we are enriching the society as well, and then also we are positioning the business for fortunes. So this would be it. But then bringing in that diversity, like I said earlier, you really have to now work on inclusion. People need to feel that sense of belonging. Let me drive it home to Nigeria now. We are all Nigerians, but if you are on the minority ethnic group, and you are working with people that are from the majority part, sometimes you would have to really be intentional about putting in a sense of belonging. So you need to ask yourself in the meetings, who are the ones speaking up? Who are we even inviting to sit in the meetings? Do you have to get to a certain grade or level before you can sit in social meeting to drive, to reach some business goals? Some women are business leaders, but for some reason, when certain meetings happen, they don't sit in the meeting. But after the outcome of the meeting, they are supposed to drive the decision that was taken in the meeting. So it's time we sit back and ask ourselves, who should we be inviting into these meetings? That for me is inclusion. And for you to drive inclusion, I'm sorry, if you go behind the policy, you have failed. Because inclusion is in how I feel. It lives in my heart. It's in how I walk down those stairs. It's in how I can call my boss by his or her first name. In fact, a major barrier for inclusion in Nigeria is the first name basis. You understand? It's actually the first name basis. If we can even take it up to add it to the workplace culture where it's normal for people to go on a first name basis, then I think that people will feel more, more welcomed in the workplace. Then you are able to voice out your opinion. So, but but essentially, it's inclusion. We have the diversity, we're working on it, but then we now really need to be intentional about inclusion. And how we can do it is that we now need to hone and harness public narratives. It's going to be the art of storytelling. So we see somebody who has been able to break that plexiglass. We need to amplify that message.
I'm going to ask you to hold on to that thought before you get on.
All right,
hold on to that thought there before you get on. I'm going to ask you a question specifically on that. But I wanted to bring this comment that comes from one of the leading voices that we have in Nigeria in the area of human resource management. And she is part of one of our attendees today. And she says, Africa has ignored a majority of its talents because they do not come in the package that we expect. We have exclusion of people living with disabilities, gender, and sometimes we exclude based on age, culture, educational experience, color. Where are the people living with disabilities in our companies? We need a mindset shift. And then she says, I will consider workforce diversity when we start seeing people living with disabilities in our organizations, physical, visual, auditory, and disability. And I'm going to ask Owade to hold on to that thought. I'm going to bring Joseph into the room now, into the conversation. He's in the room already, into the conversation. And I want to ask you, Joseph, when we talk about people living with disabilities, I mean, we can talk a lot about women. I know we're bringing women into it. We're talking a lot about women. But I know that for the African continent, people living with disabilities have been so much over the years marginalized, sidelined. It's like they don't exist. It's like for some reason they just are not part of humanity. What are your organization that you've been with? What are your perspectives about that? And what are the things that you have been seeing happen even to bring a change? Is there any change happening?
Thank you so much. Thank you and for organizing this conversation. It's really important that we talk about these issues and do something about it, because when you look at Africa and especially its policies, sometimes they are very good, and when you come to practical, it's totally different. But because before I answer your question, I should thank you for this topic. It's a good topic, diversity and inclusion. It's very big, and sometimes I feel that people, we don't do justice to it, what it means, because I always feel that if people, we understand how diverse we are, and we may even reduce some issues facing Africa. Because if I give you an example, if I understand the real meaning of diversity, you wouldn't see a Christian fighting with a Muslim. You wouldn't see a husband beating a wife because of misunderstanding. Because once you understand the diversity, the concept, it encompasses really acceptance and respect. And once you start now knowing your fellow human being, that's where conflict reduces. And it comes up with also tolerance, because sometimes you found that people were not tolerant because we don't understand another. You are white, you are black, you are an employee, I'm a master. So those things, but diversity really, I appreciate for you bringing this topic. Then on the issue of inclusion, especially of people living with disability, thank you for the fellow panelists. She really alluded to it, but what is happening on the ground, it's very sad. I'm not being too dramatic, but it's very sad. I can give you an example. At African Monitor, we do advocacy for grassroots communities. So we are kind of a voice of the voiceless. And then to do that, we do it with evidence. We do research. We do research in the communities, and with findings. Then we come up with policy issues which we raise with policymakers. And mostly they are the same people whom we are advocating for who do the advocacy. So we train them into research, and we provide them like research support or research people who can help them bring in really their issues clearly. And then we support them with a training on understanding how to approach this, what to say and how to say it. And then if I give you an example of a few years back, we did some research on how the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which replaced the MDGs, and they were signed in 2015 by most of the president. They were there in New York to say this is a new development we are embarking on, and they agreed on sort of things which comes into 17 goals. But the main theme of the SDGs is leave no one behind.
Yeah.
But if you say just that word, what comes, it's people are being left behind.
Absolutely.
Our research findings, they tell us another story. They tell us about women who are still discriminated, who are not being given the respect they support to have. They are in some of the communities, they are not women, they are not allowed to own land. Even if you were married, maybe your husband passed on, in order for you to inherit or to get the land, even the house you used to share, either you marry someone in their families or you are they send you away. You can imagine in 2020 such practices. We are still seeing people with disability, their own families, they keep them inside the house because they feel it's a shame to have a child with disability. We saw like in one locality in it's a kind of a township. I'm not sure how you call it, a township in Europe, Islam, Makululu, where disabled people, women, in order for them to access grant provided by the state, they were asked for sex. You can imagine, for someone to get what they deserve, what government has said, because you are a disabled, this is maybe 50 USD will be getting. For you to go on that list, imagine they ask you, you need to sleep with a counselor, a local leader, for you to get that money. For you to get a job, there's some area where there are like jobs like my colleague was talking, where we need to bring in really people who have been marginalized before in order for them to empower them. But then for you to get on that list, you need to give something. Corruption is still ramping. So specifically on disabled people, we are still really behind, especially in Africa. And it's not only in the rural area, even in towns which we may think they are developed. I can give you an example. 2 years back, we attended a youth meeting in Ghana where there were more than 1,000 young people from all over Africa and the world. And we gathered in a very big conference room named after the former Secretary General Kofi Annan. But I was so disappointed to find a big international conference when a person with disability was going to speak, we had to lift them because there is no such infrastructure. And that is an international conference center. You can imagine, they have those escalators. So if you are on, if you can't walk, you can't use this. We see this in houses, in the buildings, where they don't provide places or infrastructure for people living with disability. We see this in schools. Like one report we got from Botswana. If you are in certain district and you have a child born with disability, you are on your own. There's no government school where blind people can go to study. And even if you bring them in a normal school, you can imagine the infrastructure. They rely on their friend or colleague to lift them because the escalators, they can't use them. So we are not really catering for people with disability. That is my take for now.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective there. Thank you for sharing your experiences as well. You know, let me go back to Owade. Really, for when we're talking about D&I, we're not talking about D&I because we just want to talk about it. We're talking about it because when we don't harness the potential of our people, our continent suffers.
Yeah.
Yes? So let me bring you back to the point we're going to share about inclusion and the solutions. So we know what is not working. And we know that we are a long way, just as Joseph has just shared, we are a long way from it working. What are the practical steps that organizations can take when it concerns inclusion? Now, when it concerns people living with disabilities, we know, just as Joseph has shared, that even organizations are far from diverse in that sense. You agree?
Yes.
They are far from diverse in that sense. So you wouldn't go to, for example, a bank and find that you have somebody who is probably clinically has been certified blind working there. Whereas I go to a government establishment here, and the person in the reception area who's attending to customers, to clients, is somebody who is blind, medically certified blind. So what are the practical steps we can take from that point of view of inclusion to help our people bring out what the potentials are that they have? What are those practical steps?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. The first thing I would say is that we first need to accept with one practical, the first one. First, we need to accept that the Nigeria's corporate culture still lacks diversity. Even beyond Nigeria, Africa, the corporate culture still lacks diversity and inclusion. We need to come up with goals on how to achieve it. In order to drive those goals, practical tip number one, we need to drive an awareness. People need to know what diversity and inclusion is, so that when you are in a situation where you feel that you are being excluded, you can speak up. We need sponsors, which is exactly why all of us have come here today. We need sponsors, people that can lend their voices to drive the conversation. The conversation has started. We now need to ensure that we follow through. We need to drive an awareness on diversity and inclusion. And we need to make it a public, it needs to become a public narrative like the Western world has done it. In Dubai or Malaysia, when you want to step into the elevator, there's a staircase for those of you that can actually go through the staircase. There's a ramp for a wheelchair to either go up or come down. It shows that I recognize and I include everybody as they are. Come in. We would have to sponsor narratives around this. Partner with NGOs, partner with bodies. If you look around, schools for children with disability, they are in depreciated states. Sometimes people say Nigeria has a lot of problems. Let me bring it home to Nigeria now. We have a lot of problems. Even those that are able-bodied, they've not been able to cater for us. Not to talk of the person with disability, but then we are missing out a massive opportunity there. So we need to bring everybody on board. That is how we actually create that sense of belonging. And then it translates into the workplace. So even the workplace has to come up with policies around diversity and inclusion. If you're legally blind, what kind of job can you do? If you are on a wheelchair, what kind of job can we give you? Not even any kind of job. We need to make the environment enabling for you so that when you come in, you are able to do your job very, very well. Then when we start working on this, we now need to start spotlighting these profiles. We need to let people know this is how things are changing. And then based on that, the narrative begins to change. People start to know that, okay, it is no longer all right to be in a meeting where it's predominantly men, but the people that will run it are actually the women.
Men.
Exactly. Or you say that you are opening a sports complex for people, but there's absolutely nothing that accommodates for disabled people that are actually interested in sports. We need to normalize seeing somebody wearing hijab at the reception. We need to normalize a whole lot of things so that way, I was very impressed one day when I walked into a company called Andela and I saw somebody wearing hijab behind the reception. That for me was a good example of inclusion. Mm. Because, you know, for a company where, you know, you have people coming from different places, it's good to make everybody have. So if she feels comfortable in a hijab, then make the environment enabling for somebody like that. Another one I would like to call out again is Dele Taiwo. He's a magistrate. He's a dwarf who was about a month ago, he was sworn in as a magistrate in Ondo State, and it actually made the newspaper. Why should a dwarf being sworn in as a magistrate make headlines?
Make headlines.
Why should it make headlines? But it's a step in the right direction. We would have to create awareness. We would have to let people know that this is what this is. People might not, they need to know when they are being excluded. Because that's what I found out. I think sometimes people have even come to assess some certain situations. No. Yeah. Because I'm on a wheelchair does not mean I cannot direct the affairs of a department. It does that. I should be able to do whatever professional course it is that I studied. I should be able to work with that certificate. So awareness, 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 and we will need to make this narrative popular and public. That way, we would be on the right direction. And of course, really, really practical tips. We need to work on it one step at a time, but we need to be intentional. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There for sharing your thoughts there. And I was reading a post by Chizoba Mojeku yesterday on inclusion, on diversity inclusion. I thought, oh my goodness, I actually forgot to cut it off LinkedIn because it was so good. And of course, she's one of the leading voices. And of course, she's here this afternoon in among the participants. And she actually called out the governor of Lagos State. Was it the governor of Lagos State? I think there was this, there's this panel that's been organized by Bello Osage, and she called them out because there was Governor Sanwo-Olu there and two other men. So the point there was that there was no woman there was no woman in that panel. And just as you said, the men are gonna sit down, all male panel, exactly. The men are gonna sit down and discuss affairs that affect every one of us, including women. And you have not thought to call women into the panel. You've not thought to call people living with disabilities in the panel. In fact, that as Joseph says, there is this stigma that when you have a disability, you are half human. And you are absolutely right, Owadi, that the conversation needs to start and be accelerated. And I think that having people like Chizoba Mojeku, having people like yourself in the conversation, getting other people involved and making your voice that much louder will really be effective. What do you think?
Yes, yes. I know Chizoba Mojeku, and she's been doing a whole lot, driving the conversation on diversity and inclusion. And we need people that can actually lend their voice.
Yeah, but that is Chizoba that is doing that. She does a whole lot of that. And I know that Anigbo also does that. And I've read a few of your posts as well, calling out people, calling out those conversations and really making your point. But I think that there has to be much more done in terms of creating that that network of really powerful leading voice to really accelerate the conversation. I'm going to bring Joseph in at this point. And I'm going to ask you, Joseph, you know what the situation is. You've articulated what the current situation is in Africa, especially where you are right now. And Owadi has given us some practical tips from a workplace perspective, from an organizational perspective. What about in communities? Communities where the government has the say, really. What are the NGOs doing? If the government is not proactive, what are those practical steps, those other steps that can be taken that can help this conversation?
Thank you so much for the question. I think I should start by people who have already some knowledge about people living with disability, and we have said we need to advocate for them. We need to kind of up our game. In this sense that sometimes we're not really loud enough. And so I'm asking even people themselves living with disability, you need to speak up. And then we have now social media, which is helping us. If your local councillor is not listening, there's a way you can take a picture of something you want the change for and put it on Twitter and even tag your president. I think this era really we are more advantaged
more
by
opportunities.
Yes, more opportunities. So first, in countries where there are no laws really protecting enough people being left behind, people with disability, we need to maybe try to so that we have those law protecting them. But even most of the countries actually, they have signed even those international treaties which says we protect people living with the disability, we do this, but nothing is being done. Maybe let's start there, make sure that policies in place are at least implemented. And then as organization or in the community ourselves, let's not isolate people living with disability, but rather include them. We should create space to allow them to participate and being valued. There's many ways you can really bring in, and my colleague just spoke about how we can create employment for them. And even there are even countries which has quota, which says for you, in order to get maybe government um, for the government to get services from your company, you need to have this, you need to have this. And here in South Africa, there is what they call BEE. It's which try to bring black people who were persecuted during apartheid, so that they can be part of the economy. But people are clever also. They misuse this. Sometimes they will put names of black just on paper, but they are not really part of the companies. You can imagine for the I don't have anything wrong with white people, but there are some who, because they just want to see a name of a black person, they will make them like look like they are in charge, whereas they don't even get anything. It's just a small salary. They will say they have maybe 50% black, but who are those black? It's only cleaners, cutting glass, tea ladies, and you say you have 50%. Whereas in the boardroom, it's only same color. So we need really to try and change. When we say like for women emancipation, some people they do ask me, but are you sure these things is possible? Even if in our communities, people still think a woman is a second-class citizen. You can imagine. How do we make sure that we support them? So if women have this being discriminated, marginalized for centuries, so they need to be programs, intentional. My colleague said it, intentional programs which needs to bring them like on the table. Otherwise, they will still remain behind. In our community, in our homes, let's say if you want to support women in your even in your family or your community, what are the programs which you can come with which support them? Otherwise we may have programs, but then are they facilitating women or people with disability to attend? If a lady, a young woman has 4 kids at the age of 27, then there is a program which she needs to attend, maybe to learn how to sew or to attend a cooperative, a women cooperative. But she still needs to cook for those 4. When as a man you only going around with your friends to have a glass of wine. What are the intentional even change attitude we need to bring in our homes? Because if you don't support her, if you're not caring for the children when she's attending those meetings, so I don't expect anything good which will come from that. And then maybe there are many jobs. Actually, there is no jobs which people living with disability cannot do. We have seen they are so intellectual people in IT, telecommunication, library. So if we can make sure, maybe even if you went to buy something and it says it has been manufactured by people living with disability, please support that company. Ask questions. Ask who are the people behind this product? You can check on Google how many employees are living with this disability, and then we make sure that we let people know about those companies. And on the other side also, those companies which are not doing well, we need to expose them. Let the people know that, oh, even if you are buying this coffee, but do you know that this company has been doing this and this? And then people will start to wake up and say, oh, so if we can, so then people will start employing and being intentional in empowering people being left behind. So we need really to ensure that we shouldn't be like it's a favor we are doing for them. It's their right. Yeah, but also since we are speaking also for disabled people living with disability, we also need to make sure that they have a healthcare, high level healthcare facilities. Otherwise, if we're not caring for their health, then they won't be able to work. They won't be able to study. See if we're not supporting the other side. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your contribution there. Going back to Owade now as we round off. Owade, I just want to, just back to that point I was making earlier about bringing the voices together. I know that you have association of professionals, HR professionals. Yes?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, you have an active organization there that deals with issues regarding HR in organizations. How are they, how central is this issue and is this conversation to their current conversation, and what can they do? That's why I'm bringing it into that network I was talking about earlier on, that if you have the voices, your voice, and the voices, other voices, leading voices, coming out and bringing this issue to the fore and using your word intentionally, really strategically bring these issues to the fore, how much will that impact be?
Yes, I think that it will be very impactful, and it will be able to drive the conversation. Diversity and inclusion is actually a frontline topic now in the HR space here in Nigeria, owing much to the fact that, remember, the millennials are the managers now, and we demand transparency. We seek out purpose in our jobs. So that diversity and inclusion conversation is coming to the front line now. I'm on like 2 or 3 groups, HR groups, and a whole lot of emphasis on an inclusive recruitment, knowing how to remove unconscious bias during recruiting, a whole lot of coaching on interviewing tips, knowing that, okay, when you're interviewing, you don't look out for somebody that is exactly like you, learning to entertain everybody's difference. It's a conversation going on now. Bringing it into a network and then putting big voices behind it, like Edichis or Bars, would definitely work in Nigeria to drive inclusion and diversity. For diversity within Nigeria, focus will be on ethnic diversity in some certain sectors or some certain roles, depending on what area of the country we are in. Every organization will have to look into and look at, okay, where do we turn the clock around here? But at the end of the day, when we bring everybody on board, it's essential that they all have that sense of belonging. They all need to feel included. And it's recognizing their differences. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wonder if any of our attendees have questions at this point, but I have a comment from Chizoba again, who says, D&I is more than talent in our organization. It is a mindset. And let me pause there and just stress that, because indeed, just as you said, Owade, there needs to be a paradigm shift in relation to this matter, especially in our country, in our continent, Africa. So she's saying it is more of a mindset thing, and on both sides. So just as Joseph has said, on the side of those who are being marginalized, that they, and you have also alluded to that, Owade, that they realize, they understand that this is our right. You're not doing me a favor by bringing me in. I do deserve a seat at the table. You know, so there is that that shift that needs to take place from that point of view, from their side, and also the shift that needs to take place from the side of the other stakeholders, the organizations, the community leaders, the NGOs, and all of the other people who are who bring people to the seat. So she's about saying it's more of a mindset. She's saying they are our customers, and how are we serving them? What are their perspectives in terms of the services they require? What do they need? What they need in our products, or the challenges that they have with our products and services. So she's asking us to do a survey. She's asking us to get them in the conversation and ask this really key question, so that we can get their perspectives about how they think, about how we deliver value to them. It's about bringing in voices into conversations. Absolutely. Strategy, product design, facilities, infrastructure. That's what she's about saying, that it's about bringing the people that are concerned, the marginalized people, the people that are ethnicity, they're being marginalized. In gender, they're being marginalized. In terms of their style of living, they're being marginalized. It's about bringing them into the conversation, bringing their voices in terms of strategy, product design, facilities, infrastructure. And I have another comment here from Amaka. Amaka says, Joseph talked about men taking advantage of women in workplace and even in the community. I think we need to discover ourselves as women. You have to know who you are before people can actually recognize you. Most women lack education, they lack awareness, and we can start from there. Fantastic. What are your thoughts on that? Any last words, or as we round up on these comments that have come from our attendees?
Yes, thank you, Amaka, for that. Thank you, Amaka, for that comment. Yes, I said it earlier, and I'm going to reiterate it again. We need to even be very aware. Yes, she's saying something, and there's a deep cultural programming and socialization on the role of women. Yes, we need to learn some things, be aware of some certain powers that we can harness once we know that this is actually what is due to us. So we would have to really educate people on inclusion and diversity, that so they know when things are not going right, that it's actually in my space to access this kind of information, this kind of role.
It's my right.
It's my right, you should be able to break that plexiglass, glass. You should not say, oh, the minute I get to that point, I'm fine, or I cannot push beyond this, I'm a woman. Who said so?
We shatter the ceiling.
Yes. Who said so? So yes, we need to educate ourselves. We need to really uplift ourselves. So Amaka, yes, thank you for that comment. And that is where we will start from. I want to believe that as we step out of this place, we've all been educated, we are fully aware. And when we talk to other people, we will drive this awareness as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Any last word, Joseph, based on the comment that Chizoba made about the mindset, about recognizing what our clients are talking about and bringing them into the conversation in relation to key areas of strategy, in relation to areas regarding product design, infrastructure, all of those things, facilities. What are your last words? And even about what the comment Amaka made about women.
Yeah, thanks for the comment, and especially the Amaka ones. No, it's true. It's true. Once people are aware of who they are, they tend really to react differently. And that's why we need to really teach young people about identity, self-awareness. But these things are not really happening as it should, but we need to. But on the other side also, it shouldn't be called like it's a woman's fault when someone who've got authority on her use that and to abuse her. So it shouldn't be seen as that. That's why we need really to increase awareness and make sure that the community, because African community, we used to be there for each other. Your child he used to be a child of the community, but now it's turning like everyone on their own. So if I see a big man trying to rule a young woman, I would just say, oh, it's not my business. It shouldn't be like that. In a community, something happened in a family, an uncle abuses their niece, they abuses their wife's sister, and say, oh, for me not to break up, let's keep it in the family. We should stop that, because once everything happens in the family, even on the issue of people living with disability, it starts in the family. Once families, we know what's happening, I think things will change. Maybe my closing thought, I think we need also to have the kind of the conversation we're having now, and even bring it to the mainstream media, because many people are not really aware of this. You will ask, but what can I do? But there are many things individually, as an organization, we can do, but which is not taking place. But also, I would encourage that organizations speaking for women emancipation, organization that support people living with disability, they should also push for an increase in their constituency to be represented in the political space. Because once you have an MP who's who's living with this disability, at least they can be there to speak for you. Once you have more women there, you will be sure that they will speak for you. Once there are laws which tend to undermine your constituency, you will be there for them. But also we need to promote social inclusion in our schools, in our communities, where we speak clearly, openly about our differences. If you are a white and I'm black, let's be open, but also speak about what brings us together. Because being different does not mean we need to fight.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of the webinar. I'm conscious of the time. I mean, we could go on, but I'm really happy that the conversation has really been enriching. Thank you so much to Owade and to Joseph. Joseph, all the way from South Africa, even though this is a remote space, I can also say all the way, and Owade all the way from Nigeria. Thank you very much for joining leading conversations today, to lend your own leading voice to this conversation. The last thing I'd like to say is that, you are the reason why I connected with you, was because I'd seen that you are leading voices in your own area, and this is an area that is your area. And I'm trusting that we're going to have this kind of conversation again, not very long from now. And I definitely bringing you and other people again into the room. But the thing there is that we need to, I think, for where you have a lot of influence, we need to really push, just as you've been doing, push this conversation even further, and create that high level of awareness. Because when the conversation keeps on coming back to the same thing, it's before people's eyes. So their mindset shifts, their paradigm shifts in little ways like that. And so small changes can make a whole lot of difference when we keep bringing those changes before the eyes of people. So wherever we are, and even for the attendees in today's webinar, thank you so much again for joining us. But let us bring this conversation into our small spaces, wherever we have influence, so that we can quickly get the changes, no matter how minor those changes might be, we can quickly get them, because Africa's potentials are in all of its people. And if some of its people are marginalized and the human capital largely untapped, then Africa suffers. And all of these things that we are suffering today would become very, very, very quickly a thing of the past when we're able to harness all of the value that each and every one of us can bring. So thank you so much for joining me today on Talk Active Leading Conversations. Please leave your comments. Tell me what you think about today's webinar, how we can improve it, what other topics that you want us to talk about, and I'll be really glad to take those feedback. So thank you again. Thank you, Chizoba Mojeku, one of the leading voices that I highly respect. Thank you, Wadi. Thank you, Joseph. And by God's grace, we shall be in touch very soon again.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.